Hi, so now it's time to get my hands dirty, or at least Ed's gloves dirty, actually working on this thing, making it go so we can make it to Brighton. But first, some exciting news. I've got confirmation that there is another tiller steered version of this in the Los Angeles Natural History Museum. I think it's an 8HP version rather than this faster 9HP, but we'll see. I'm still investigating that, see what I can find. Still putting feelers out there, so I'll let you know how I get on. But first, back to the spanners. So this is the top of the evaporator, converting the liquid petrol into a fuel-air mix. Now this is the top of the inlet manifold here, the black pipe that goes across the top of the engine. This, with the screws on, is the top of the evaporator unit. And this here is a needle that's actually attached to the top of the inlet valve. So as the piston goes down, it sucks against a spring. The inlet valve goes down to let in more fuel and air, and at the same time it does that, it lets more fuel into the evaporator. It's quite a nifty little mechanism, but obviously one I don't want to damage when I remove the evaporator. So I've got to be very careful. As I don't know what year any of these unions and connections and bolts are from, I've got to take each little joint as it comes to get the right size spanner. I found that these are 9/16 and ½ inch. So if I can get in there, oops, find the camera. So that's that one done. Obviously, like any car, it's quite tight in places, and it's always made a little bit harder when you try and fit a camera in. It's another pair of eyes. Well, the first connections I'm undoing are coming undone quite nicely. The inlet manifold's quite easy to remove. It just sort of lifts off there. You can now see in the top of the evaporator, and the needle actually goes all the way across. That's going to make it quite tricky. If I push the valve in as far as it will go, I can't see the end of the needle, so that's going to make it quite tricky to get the evaporator out towards the camera here because there's a cross member. So I'm just going to have a look to see if I can release that needle at all. Hopefully there is a way, we'll find out. Okay, so this is the other end of the needle. This is the end on the top of the valve. As you can see, that slides in and out. And it's got this bit of wire through the nut here that then feeds through into a fork underneath. You can just about see there. I hope, if I remove that bit of wire, I'll be able to remove the needle. Tricky. There we go. The question is, can I now remove the needle? Or at least push the valve back and leave the needle where it is. I can. It's hard to show on camera, but the needle is now staying where it is. Just see the hole in it there that goes in the wire. So I want to keep that where it is because that's potentially some sort of adjustment. I can feel there's actually a bit of spring on the end of this needle as well. It goes into the top of the valve, so got a few interconnected things going on here, but at least that needle is now separate to the top of the valve. So I should then be able to remove the evaporator and bring the needle with it, leaving the rest of the engine where it is. So with the pipe disconnected and the inlet manifold disconnected and the needle hopefully disconnected, there's just 2 nuts and bolts holding it in place, which seem to be 9/16. So I'll get working on removing those. Okay, so what are we left with now? We've got the top of the valve in the engine. I'm trying not to rotate that, but that goes in and out with the valve. This is the fork where that locking wire fed into. It just sort of rested in there. It was a bit of a fiddle to remove though. And then this is where the fuel air mixture goes into the engine. So this must go round and then round to the other side of the inlet valve. And there must be a seal there to stop that, stopping it coming out in this direction. So here we are. This is the evaporator from the 1900 Winton. It's a fairly hefty chunk of bronze. A nice tap at the bottom. And this is the needle that's attached to the top of the inlet valve. Nice point at the end. And that goes into a hole there. And just about see a gauze in there. Lots of slot-headed screws. I really don't like slot-headed screws compared to the modern alternatives, but that is the way. On this side it proudly displays Winton, just proving it's the correct part for the job. Now one thing that cars of this period have got a lot of, and that's slot head screws. Just the straight line, no posi drive or anything like that, because that was invented far later. One thing you quickly learn is that there's 2 different sorts of screwdrivers. There's ones like this that are quite common, and as you can see the tip is a wedge. Whereas what you actually want are ground ends or gun makers screwdrivers, where if you see here, the ends, if I can just get it in focus, the ends actually go to a parallel before the tip rather than a wedge shape. That means that the grip in the screwdriver, in the screw head, is consistent rather than just a peak at the ends. Now obviously you want a screwdriver tip that fits perfectly in the slotted head screw, so this set might not be enough, and it's, as you can see, it's metric anyway. So we'll see how we get on. I might have to stop occasionally and run off and buy some more screwdrivers. I don't really want to remove this because moving this will depend on the seat for the needle, and so changing the amount of fuel that goes in. But there's a screw behind it, so I'm going to have to do something. I've just got to be really careful. Great, so that's all of those fixings out. I wonder how easy it will separate now. Okay, so there's a paper gasket on there, and I've got a fine plan for how to replace that. And then we've got a gauze further down the barrel. What I'm trying to achieve here is just make sure there's nothing nasty lurking at the bottom. And I'll give it a good old cleaning so it's as good as new. Now this is the point where I should probably explain what's going on. This converts petrol, the liquid petrol and air, into a fuel-air mix by dripping the petrol onto a series of gauzes. As it goes through the gauzes that get finer as the further you go down, then the petrol vaporises and mixes with the air, and then you get the fuel-air mix ready for the cylinder to combust. Alexander Winton avoided the term carburettor for this, as he thought that this design was superior to the carburettors of the time that were much larger, so he called it a feeder or mixing valve. What can we do with this paper gasket? It's obviously been hand cut before. I think we can do better than that. So while the mixer valve is off, it seems to be a good time to flush through the fuel lines. Now, I can just, that's a long thread, I can just pour the cleaning fluid in and let it drain through, but it'd be nice if I pushed it through just to get any muck and rubbish out of there. That's not going to be very effective. So I think it's time for going back to the computer, FreeCAD and some 3D printing. Great, so that didn't take long. So here we have a nice bung. I've printed it in a flexible filament. So that will sit snugly in the hole. And then I can just put the airline on top and blow it through. There is a breather on the other end of the tank, but I can just use some rubber glove to cover that up if that's a problem. But hopefully that will give me enough air pressure just to blow it through. But first I'm just going to flush it with a bit of liquid to make sure that all to make sure the fuel valve is open, because I don't want to start actually pressurising the tank. I want to make sure it's got an outlet and that I can actually flow through, because the last thing I want to do is blow up our lovely brass fuel tank. What I didn't expect to find was all the cleaning fluid leaking from somewhere else. So there's a little glass float bowl, and this is the O-ring that seals it up. But it seems to have degraded over the years, so that obviously needs changing. But looking at the fluid that came out, that's nice and clean, so no concerns there. Now it's time to clean the feeder. Now we've got it all apart and clean, it's time to put it back together again, but as some might say, that's a job for another day.